So this is Ashley Masterich on October 7th, 2013 at UT Jesse H. Jones Communication Center with Gonzalo Barrientos. The project is entitled the Voting Rights Oral History Project, which is in conjunction with the Voces Oral History Project. So thank you, Gonzalo, for joining me today to talk to me about this fascinating topic in history.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you. Let's just start with some basic questions. Your family background. You were born on July 20th, 1941. Where at city did you spend the majority of your childhood?
In Texas.
Okay.
I was born in Galveston. I'll have to go back a little bit just so you can get a full picture.
Okay.
My family is originally from Bastrop, Texas, which is 30 miles outside of Boston. My grandpa and my dad, my uncles were coal miners. North of Bastrop, about 4 miles, are coal mines. In the early 40s, approximately, the coal mines closed because it was subbituminous coal, soft coal, okay, not as hot burning as the anthracite coal from the Northeast. At any rate, that was about the time my mom and dad got married, and when they closed the coal mines down, they moved to Galveston. My dad was a longshoreman in Galveston. I was born there. After a year or so, my dad was hurt on the ships, and so they came back to the little farm in Bastrop. After that, I grew up basically the migrant trail, farm workers picking cotton in Central Texas, South Texas, and West Texas, places like in South Texas, Mathis, Sinton,
okay, and
then northwest toward Paducah, Littlefield, Monday, Tahoka, Lubbock, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Came back to Bastrop every year, especially when we first started school, my sister and I.
Okay, and it was just your sister and you were the only siblings from your mother and father?
Correct.
Okay, and what were your mother and father's names?
My father's name was Gonzalo Barrientos. He was senior and I was junior. And my mother's name was Cristina, and my sister was Alicia.
Okay. Describe a typical day with your family, your mother, your father, and your sister.
At what point in time?
Let's just say when you were maybe 8 to 10 years old, when you were younger. Any significant memories that you have with them, or a certain day you enjoyed?
I think it would be interesting for me to go back to when I was 6.
Okay.
The first year of public schools.
Mm.
Mom and Dad were only had 1 or 2 grades of education, basically in Spanish, and but they thought that education was most important. So when it came time for me to go to school, there were 3 schools in Bastrop. 1 for blacks, 1 for whites, and 1 for Mexicans. A little girl named Minerva Delgado was, I think, in the 2nd or 3rd grade. A civil rights lawyer from San Antonio took the case on segregation of Mexican Americans to court, and along with several other lawyers, won the case, and that set the stage for desegregation of Mexican Americans in the whole state, not just in Bastrop.
Okay. What year was that? If you could guess?
Oh, I don't know, close to 1950s.
Okay.
So at that time, you go to school, they give you a piece of paper and a crayon, and that was all. So the first year I went to the Mexican school. By the 2nd year, because of the desegregation, I was going to school with the white kids. You go to school, and it was interesting because sometimes I'd come home crying. My grandfather would say, ¿Qué pasó, mijo? I said, well, the white kids, I don't think they like me. And he would say, no los culpes a ellos, sino al corral donde se criaron. Do not blame them, rather blame the corral in which they grew up. And that basically set up the whole framework for the rest of my life, living that and having gone through some situations going out to West Texas We could not use the bathrooms. We had to stop, and the rest areas were culverts underneath the highway, if you get my drift. I think we invented fast food because we couldn't eat in the cafes or restaurants. We'd order around the back, hamburgers to go, so fast food is the way we did until we got to the location where we were going to pick cotton. So it just depends, a typical day with my parents, on at what point in time and where.
Okay. I guess just you mentioned how, desegregation of schools. So this was typical for all Mexican American children in Texas. This was not just a single experience for yourself. You felt like this was a normal, like the life of a normal Mexican American child, correct?
Yes and no. There were certain areas of Texas during that time where the majority of citizens were Mexican Americans. For example, from Brownsville to Laredo, the border areas. And so basically there, I don't believe there was much segregation. But once you got away from the border, all the way up to Abilene or East Texas, there was segregation.
Okay. During your adolescence, so maybe middle school, high school, when you're starting to realize more things and see the differences between different people, what was your vision for the future regarding Mexican American rights?
A multifaceted phenomena. One had to go through competition at work, at school. And it was always from my mother and father to study, study, study. If you're getting beat down or bullied, my mother's favorite saying was, "No te dejes," do not allow it, do not permit it. So there was competition all the time, and I think that in a way helped make me stronger. I took up the trumpet, played trumpet in the band. I played baseball, lettered in baseball, lettered in track, lettered in football, 130-pound linebacker, Bastrop Bears. Competition. I can do it, I can do it. My mother and father would say, you can do it, and other people. So it was that way all the time growing up. And we accomplished a few things because of that push that was always against some of us.
Were there certain roles and occupations that Mexican Americans were expected to fill during?
Sure, picking cotton, chopping cotton, washing cars, digging ditches.
So manual labor.
Okay.
You were able, though, to attend the University of Texas at Austin, where you got a BA in psychology and Spanish. Why those two subjects?
Well, first of all, let me be very clear. In the last junior year of high school, I didn't want to go pick cotton anymore because that was my whole life, every season for farming. And so I had some cousins in Galveston still, and they said, get out of the 100-degree weather and sweating and being dirty, come to Galveston and we'll get you a job as a busboy. So my junior year in high school, I was a busboy and a waiter in Galveston, the hotels, the large hotels over there. And I met a young lady whose name was Emma. And long story short, she was 17, I was barely 18, we got married. And I came to the University of Texas and she went to work, and we kind of grew up together. So at the University of Texas, I worked full-time most of the time, flipped hamburgers at the Holiday House, which is right across the street from the Austin Catholic Church there on Guadalupe. And I had first wanted to start off getting a major in hotel and restaurant management. And then I thought of all the things that I and my family and other Tejanos had been through, and I said, I want to go into something a little more useful, which was sociology, psychology, etc. By my junior year, we had 3 children, so I had to go to work. My wife had been working all of the time, and so I never got the degree, but I got a pretty good education.
Okay. Would you say then, what was your biggest obstacle that you faced during the time where you were trying to study, have a family, raise children, and still manage to make an income for yourself and your wife and your kids?
The biggest obstacle was
Yes.
trying to work full time and trying to study and make the grades. The University of Texas, if you come from a school where your graduating class was 27 people and you come to the University of Texas, one of my first classes was in geology with 200-300 students in there, which kind of blows you away. Getting into the scene, if you will, over here, the methodology, in working, taking care of the babies and all that stuff.
Okay. Who were your, I guess, who or what were your inspirations or role models during this time in your collegiate years and in your young adulthood?
Oh, a number of people. I had at one time listened intently to John Kennedy, and he had something that really inspired about serving your country. I met Lyndon Johnson when I was playing in the high school band in Bastrop. But during those years, it was the civil rights years, and of course, it made me think back on Benito Juarez, who was president of Mexico, and Emiliano Zapata, Villa, Martin Luther King. I met Jesse Jackson, who later worked on a few things together. Women, you always remember your mom and your aunts to begin with. In later years, there were other women who had inspired me also.
Okay. So did these people kind of help lead you into where you wanted to run for office and kind of pursue that aspect of your life, or were they just overall influences to make you a well-rounded person?
Absolutely had an influence, but also the day-to-day workings led me there. I had been a ed psych research assistant at the university. I had worked as what they called a ward attendant at that time at Travis State School, where at that time the terminology was used, retarded children, developmentally, mentally disabilities. So that taught me a lot also, seeing individuals like that. Later worked as a community organizer under John Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson's War on Poverty. I was a community organizer for the National Urban League. I was later a trainer for Vista Peace Corps. I was later a program officer for the federal government, placing the domestic Peace Corps, Vista, volunteers all over the state of Texas. All in the meantime, I wish I had a nickel for every march I was in. Civil rights, farm workers, the war against in Vietnam. I went to Washington and worked 1 year in Washington for the Institute for Community Development. Came back, and what led me into politics was interesting. Upon coming back, we were organizing groups of Tejanos. We called ourselves Chicanos at that point. So that term also is interesting because we went everywhere from on the very negative side, from being called Mexicans, greasers, taco eaters, etc., to Latin Americans, Mexican Americans, Hispanic. So we called ourselves Chicanos at the time that we gave ourselves that name. At any rate, we were starting these groups, and one evening over at the Austin Salvation Army Center, which was on about Holly and I-35, we were talking about the problems that the community had. And so we went around the room and said, well, you solved those issues in the legislature. Oh, okay. Have to be a House member or a senator. So we went around the room and we said, how about you? And somebody would say, oh, I don't speak well. How about you? I have too many children. How about you? I work at night. And finally I said, well, I'll do it. So I ran for office first time in 1972 after I came back from Washington.
Okay, let's backtrack a little. You mentioned your work with the National Urban League and with Vista and Peace Corps. Can you give me like a chronological dates for those?
Let's see. Community organizer for the National Urban League and Project Enable in 1965.
Okay.
Trainer for Vista Peace Corps 66 to 67, 68. A federal employee for Vista about 68 to 70, 71. And then in Washington from 71 to 72.
And then you came back to Texas in 72, and you were then elected into office in 1975 for the Texas House of Representatives, correct?
In 72, we ran for one of the 4 House of Representative positions in Travis County. We did not have single-member districts, had to run the whole county. And they told us that we were foolish because we only had 10% Mexican-American population. And I kind of laughed it off and said, well, I speak English. I would hope that would be sufficient to communicate. We got into a runoff against a 14-year incumbent and learned a great deal. Politics is not just about running for office and they vote for you or not. There's a lot in between that you have to do. Got into a runoff. The opponent had more money coming in from the lobby, and so we lost 42 to 43,000. 74, came back and ran again, got into another runoff, and with the same fellow. And this time we won by 84 votes. The opponent calls for a recount, we gain 10 votes, and we win by 94 votes. So the first time it was the Heartbreak Kid, the second time it was landslide Barrientos by 94 votes. And we served 10 years in the Texas House.
Tell me a little bit about your responsibilities when you were serving those 10 years in the House.
Well, the first thing that most people don't realize is that there's a learning process unless you have been working there as an employee or assistant to one of the members for years. You have to know what's what, you have to know the rules, you have to know the unwritten rules, and you have to vote on laws. And what I consider very, very important is doing constituent work. Every day, people who come in and say, can you help find my daughter a scholarship? I just got fired from a state agency. Our uncle is in prison. Can you get him out on parole? You name it, they call and they come and you try to help. The voting is easy. You just say aye or nay. And most of the time it's easy to come to a conclusion on which way you should vote.
What was your biggest, or were you ever frustrated with this learning curve when you first entered into office? Did you ever feel at times that this wasn't for you anymore? Did you ever question yourself?
The only question I had was making $600 a month, which is all they pay. And so I had to hustle to on other jobs to make a living for the kids and family. No, I never questioned it because it was the right thing to do. And at first, one thinks, at least I, that you go up to the front mic and give a heck of a speech and pass a law. Didn't work like that at all. There are committees. There are rules. You have to get along on each little step. It's very difficult to pass a law. It's very easy to destroy and crash with something you're trying to carry.
Were there any major legislation or bills that you were particularly keen on during your time in the House? Or those mostly in when you served in the Senate from 1985 to 2007?
No, there were some important things going on. I was fortunate in having landed an Appropriations Committee position. So that was very important in terms of putting out the money for schools, education, transportation, dealing with the less fortunate, the poor. So that was important. There were other areas that we were working on. I remember one specific area that I passed a bill on. It had to do with a child who was taken to a West Texas hospital, a city in West Texas. And they asked the parents if they had insurance, and they said no, so they couldn't take the child. They drove 30 or 40 miles to another little town, and the child died as they were carrying him in. So I developed a bill that said if under life-threatening situations, you will be treated regardless of anything and deal with money later, or insurance, what have you. We're still dealing with that problem today. There were other laws that we were taking on, but that was one of the main ones that I carried.
So you, when you were in office, your particular area that you kind of advanced the right for Mexican Americans, you worked with the underprivileged and you kind of advocated for those less fortunate. Did you mostly focus, I guess, which area did you mostly focus on in particular? This
Area and getting elected in this area is unique. I may still have been today the only one minority elected by a majority white district. It was incumbent upon me that I show my constituents that I would represent people, citizens, regardless of what color, whether they were white, black, Hispanic, Asian, or what have you, in an equal manner. Of course, at the same time, I was still advocating for the rights of Mexican Americans, but that included anyone who was in the area of not getting a good education, adequate jobs, non-discrimination in all of these areas.
Okay.
I am reminded later, a very good friend of mine, Senator Elliott Shapley from El Paso, Anglo, spoke fantastic Spanish, elected by a majority Hispanic district. And I, over here, a Mexican American, elected by a majority white district. I thought that was pretty cool. I thought that was the American way, if you will.
Very nice. Let's move on to your time in the Senate and just kind of like we...
Time out.
Okay.
Let me get a little...
The water's right below you,
water.
yes.
Right.
Again.
Okay.
We are rolling.
Okay. All right. So just to backtrack a little bit, who were those people that were attending the Salvation Army meeting that one night when y'all were going around the room talking about these issues that you were affected by?
That was several decades ago. So I can only tell you that it were some of the activists in the community, primarily from the east and south side, Mexican American, of course. People like John Trevino, who was a neighborhood center director, probably Rudy Reyes from Montopolis, neighborhood center director, probably Richard Moya, who was later an investigator for legal aid, people like that.
Okay. And then fast forward to right where we left off, your responsibilities moving on to when you were in the Texas State Senate from 1985 to 2007. Kind of what were the main differences between your time in the House of Representatives and then your time in the Senate?
Well, after 10 years in the House, ran for the Senate. Very difficult race, had two counties, Hays County and Travis County. Got in a runoff and won. By this time we had learned quite a bit about campaigning and how to do it and raising a little money. Interestingly, a little sidebar, when I was running for the House and then later the Senate, people were wondering where we got our startup money. And interestingly, a compadre of mine owned a ballroom, a dance hall, and it was called, well, there were several. There were the Latin Quarter, there was Whiskey River, there was El Chaparral, and we had friends who were musicians, people like the Ramos brothers, the Mexican, the Texas Revolution, Alfonso Ramos, Ruben Ramos, Little Joe, Salaman, Shorty Ortiz, etc. And so they would play at a reduced price, and my compadre would give the ballroom to us. So we did dances, el baile, and we would raise maybe $500, $1,000, $2,000 a whack. And the opposition was always saying, "Where's he getting all that money?" It was from the people in dances primarily. But at any rate, we won for the Senate. Night and day, the Senate and the Texas House. Texas House is 150 state representatives. The Texas Senate is 31. More of a gentleman and gentle ladies area of legislative process. But not always. There were a few fights, if you will. You still have the process and learning the rules and whatnot, but I enjoyed it much more.
Was the learning curve easier for you when you transitioned from the House to the Senate, since you already had some experience in office, or was it different learning tasks?
No, not at all. As a matter of fact, very similar. So that you learn that over the years, and what to do, how to pass legislation, how to block legislation. So enjoyed it quite a bit more. Passed more legislation.
Who were your lead people in your campaigns?
My
For
what?
your lead people, or the people that you went to, or you worked alongside with, in your campaigns for the House and Senate?
We developed our own as we went along. We had to save money, stretch the dollar. For example, we learned how to silk screen and print our own signs by the thousands. We had to learn how to build the 4x8 signs and where to put them and all of these things. At the same time, we went to a political consultant who was just getting started, Peck Young, for one, very well-known person here in Austin for your block door-to-door kind of campaigns and targeting and whatnot. Also was fortunate to run into a fellow named Dean Rindy who did the media and did a good job of that. So we became pretty polished fairly quickly in the methodology.
Okay. Okay. Do you mind, maybe you mentioned just a second ago how you said the Senate, it was more civil, gentlemanlike, ladylike. Could you kind of give maybe an example of that terminology, or, you know, how would you describe that?
Well, first of all, the process of debating a bill. In the House, you have the front microphone where you present your legislation. And the only debate there is the back microphone, where it's to ask questions to the author of the bill. Otherwise, it all takes place in committees. In the Senate, each desk has their own microphone. Or if you're loud enough, you can do it without the microphones. And the language used is a little more formal. Will the gentlelady from Blanco, Texas, yield for a question? Will the senator from the great city of Dallas partake of a few moments of silence? Those are some of the differences. Now, in the Senate, you can't get anything up there to debate unless you already have the votes to pass it. So that saves a lot of time. And you do most of your work in committee and trying to get your legislation prepared.
Okay.
We have a president of the Senate, which is typically the lieutenant governor of the state of Texas, who is elected statewide. But the Senate can reject the lieutenant governor by saying you shall or you shall not be the president of the Senate. But generally, it's the lieutenant governor who operates the Senate process and the selection of senators to which committees.
And I don't know if you said this again, do you mind repeating what committee were you primarily in the Senate?
I learned early on, you go into the House and the Senate, or at least the House, and you want to do everything. You want to introduce 55 bills. You want to work on this, on this, on this, on this, on that. But I learned that if you're really serious about passing some legislation, you prioritize and you take 3 or 4 bills and you work your heart out for those. But I also learned in trying to help the needy, the less fortunate, equal rights for women, minorities, that a lot of that depended on money. And where's the money? In the House, it's the Appropriations Committee. In the Senate, it's the Finance Committee. So I concentrated on the money. I was on numerous other committees, Intergovernmental Affairs, the Nominations Committee. I was chairman of the Nominations Committee. Whenever the governor appoints somebody, they got to come through us. We say yes or no to the governor. And sometimes I said no.
Okay, you've been in office for many years, or you were in office for many years, and you describe all your roles and responsibilities. How did you ever avoid being burnt out, in a sense?
You do get quite frustrated sometimes, especially in the later years when more Republicans were being elected. And they're putting down your priorities as low priorities. But you have to remember, you're not up there for your own glorification. You're there because you're representing people in your district and the people of Texas. And so you just keep going. But after being there for 21 years, And it was always kind of a struggle. If you're wealthy, or if you've got a big business, or even if you're an attorney, you can do that on the side. But otherwise, the other members, they have to work and try to do that at the same time. Because I was from Austin, I was on call all of the time. I'm still from Austin, and I'm still on call by 20 or 30 people a week who still keep calling me. But I don't have 10 employees anymore, is what I tell them. At any rate, after about 21 years in the Senate, I decided it was time to pay more attention to the family, which was growing, and grandchildren. And unfortunately, 3.5 years ago, my wife passed very suddenly. And so we didn't get to do everything we wanted.
Do you think, though, it was the right time for you to kind of walk away from your time in the Senate at the very end, or would you have liked to expanded your time there?
Years before, Congressman Jake Pickle had called me and said he was going to retire. He was the congressman from Austin. And I had thought about running. But as it all turned out, I did not run for several reasons. And we are in 2013, and I don't think I would want to be part of 435 people in the Washington House of Representatives who think it's, at least the Republicans think it's more important to play games and than to compromise and think of the people that they represent.
What was your hardest thing you had to, or what was your biggest struggle while serving in the House or the Senate, or both, if you could think? Was it the struggle between the Democrats and the Republicans, and how, you know, there's always instances of bickering or disagreement?
That absolutely in the later years was difficult. The disagreements between the Democrats and the Republicans. Although I passed a couple of bills where the Republicans were whole hog for it. Number one, or an example, the affirmative action had been nixed by the courts. And being in Austin, I got a number of calls from around the state. What are we going to do about Hispanics and African Americans? And so I called a summit, first at the LBJ School of Public Affairs, and then later another one at the AFL-CIO, and brought in activists from around Texas, lawyers, scholars, professors. And a professor who was here for a while, David Montejano, and some of his colleagues suggested something, and so I introduced and passed the top 10% rule, where all the students of Texas, regardless of whether you go to a large school in Houston or Dallas, or in Poteet, Texas, if you're in the top 10%, you're automatically admitted to colleges and universities. And that had nothing to do with race. It was race neutral, and so we passed it. Now, ever since then, I get the distinct feeling that the University of Texas doesn't like it. Too bad.
Just elaborate, I guess, on why do you think they don't like it?
I think large institutions want to do what they want to do. And they don't like, in some cases, being told by the legislature, you will do this or you will do that. And there were efforts by the University of Texas, primarily, to lower that percentage, the top 10%. I guess you'd have to ask the president of the university and so forth.
Okay. So moving away, we've talked.
By the way,
yes.
I went to UT. My son went to UT. My daughter went to Texas A&M. So even now I got grandkids who go to UT and A&M, so hook 'em and gig 'em.
Right. You're not opposed to UT, so that's good. I've talked about your background and kind of your professional and political involvement. We're going to switch kind of to the Voting Rights Act. So one of my first questions for that is, how have you personally been affected by the Voting Rights Act?
Well, as I've mentioned, my whole life had to do with fighting for equal rights, equal treatment. Nothing more, nothing less, just being treated the same as any American. And for the groups that I primarily tried to assist, the poor, minorities, women, the mentally disabled, disabilities. And so I lost my train of thought. What was the last
How have you
part of
been
your question?
affected by the Voting Rights Act?
Well,
Yes.
Because of living all that for so many years, and thinking back on the marches and why we were marching, and the Voting Rights Act came about, and I think that I and people who were working at the same time, like Senator Joe Bernal from San Antonio, Representative Ben Reyes from Houston, Representative Paul Moreno from El Paso, all these the men and women, we helped make the voting rights come about in our own ways by having done all the other work that had a groundswell so that Lyndon Johnson and the Congress in Washington passed it.
Okay. What have Americans in general misunderstood about this particular act?
I think Americans then, especially in the South, maybe some Americans, let me put it that way, did not quite understand why this legislation came about. Some of the ones who studied it are some of the ones who saw the inequities, the gross negligence of justice, in some cases understood it. But many in the South did not want to understand it. And as Lyndon Johnson has been said, that we've lost the South for a generation because of that. I think even today there's some misconception about why do we have affirmative action? Why did we have it? Everybody's an American and they're working, they pay their taxes. What are they griping about? Well, you have to live it to really know what it's about. And it is about being treated unequally. It is about not getting promotions in your work. It is about training someone else for a job you have and then getting demoted. And that most of the time has been Anglos. The good old boy system. And people have to study the issue and look at the background, walk in my shoes, and see what it's all about.
How do you feel the younger generation, though, views advancements concerning their race and heritage? Do you feel like, how do they feel, or how do you think they feel about these advancements that have been made over the years?
Unfortunately, I don't think enough young people realize some of the trials and tribulations that certain people in our country went through. And I don't think enough of it is taught. It certainly is not taught in the public schools. For example, the history of many people today would look at me or someone of a little color and name Gutierrez, Barrientos, Lara, or what have you, and think that, oh, you just walked across the border, didn't you? That's not the case. there's so much to learn, and I don't think enough of our students, especially Hispanic students, know the background, where we come from, who we are, where we come from, and where we're going. A lot of the history is not being taught in our public schools, and we seem to be walking backwards in a way if you look at the Texas State Board of Education.
How do you think, though, we can raise the awareness of, to kind of reverse the walking backward instance that you mentioned?
I don't want to turn this into a political situation, but I think that the general public in Texas has to learn the difference between what being an American is and compromising and not listening to the Tea Party or extremists. Either way, left or right extremists, but recognize that we are indeed our brothers and sisters keepers, and we ought to act that way sometime.
Okay, who were 3 people that you believe advanced the cause for political empowerment for Mexican Americans? Let's start at a national level, if you could think of 3 off the top of your head and kind of go down from there.
Well, it would be difficult on the national level because we didn't have too many Hispanics, Mexican Americans on the national level. It would have been people like Cesar Chavez, who I work with. I'll tell you a little side story on that if you like in a minute, but I was one of the coordinators for the boycotts on lettuce and grapes for Cesar Chavez. Musicians have always held a special place for Hispanics. It may be anywhere from Little Joe y La Familia. It may have been the there's so many musicians, so many wonderful people. Lydia Mendoza, and then of course icons like Pedro Infante or so many others. In Texas, Henry B. Gonzalez, Joe Bernal, Irma Rangel, Alicia Chacon. See, one of the things that we should realize, if I may speak as a Mexican American, as a Tejano, is that we don't need to have one leader in our country for this group or in Texas. There are many leaders, and they come from all parts of Texas, and they're men and women who are Hispanic Tejanos. Which reminds me, even today, we kind of joke about here in Austin, this street out here, Guadalupe, or Manchac, and not general public not realizing that Spanish has been on this land for nearly 500 years. That's what I was talking about. A little sidebar, that when you're running for office and your name is Barrientos, you are thankful if they don't have to roll their R's, just say Barrientos is fine and vote right. So there's still a lot to go here. And of course, there are those who think that we're trying to turn this into Mexico. We are not. This is our country. Many of us and our families were here before the U.S. was established here as Tejanos. At any rate, I got off the subject, so get me back.
It's okay. I appreciate the stories. Why don't you tell me real quick about that side story, though, with Cesar Chavez that you had mentioned, real quick?
Cesar Chavez asked me to come to La Paz, California, where the farm workers' headquarters were. And we were going to eat lunch. Very humble dwelling there, and a lady brought us 2 paper plates. And they placed a banana and an apple on the plates. And I'm thinking, I guess we're going to have dessert first. Well, it turns out later Cesar Chavez was a vegetarian, a vegan. And I always got a kick out of that, being so out of it. But he was such a sweet guy, gentle and powerful, and always dedicated.
So you just discussed those who advanced political empowerment. Could you think of anyone, either at a national, state level, or even local level in Austin, that have maybe hindered political empowerment for Mexican Americans?
I will not get into speaking negatively about anything. That is to say, about Mexican Americans, unless it is an issue that is very, very clear. Because I think people want to do the right things, maybe not for the right reasons, but I think that part of our problem, like any other group, has been nitpicking with each other. I know, for example, I knew a lot of the folks who were in the Raza Unida party that was came up out of the civil rights movement in Texas, and I worked with a lot of the folks who were there, and I helped the Raza Unida party in some places at some times. And I remember when we won the primary in '74 for the Texas House, a couple of the Raza Unida people asked me to change parties and run as a Raza Unida party. And I said, you know, I would kind of like to do that, but it's not realistic. Austin, Texas is not Carrizo or Laredo or someplace that has a majority of Hispanics there, Mexican Americans. So I think we need to use more common sense in what we do. I know there are some Mexican Americans, some Hispanics who are Republicans, and fine, as long as they have the information and they base their desires on facts.
Okay. Let's switch into your political affiliation and the political spectrum in regards to yourself and Mexican Americans. First off, where do you fall in line within the party system?
You mean philosophically?
I mean, well, I know you're a Democrat, correct?
Absolutely.
Well, I guess let's get into, I guess, the philosophically, where do you fall?
This is me. I was always taught by my mom, dad, and family about using common sense. It so happens that the Democratic Party has been there the most for the most people on important issues. You have your Social Security, you have your Medicare, you have your GI Bill, you have all those issues that have been for the general public, and especially helps the less fortunate. In terms of, so that party has been mostly with me, and that's why I've been with that party most. Now, in terms of political philosophy, to the right or to the left, I use common sense. Some people ask me, are you a liberal or are you conservative? And I said, well, I'm liberal sometimes and I'm conservative sometimes. I'm conservative about spending money, especially other people's money. I'm liberal when it comes to helping people and making darn sure that women's rights are fully supported and that voting rights are supported and education is supported equally for everybody. If you want to call that liberal, go ahead. I think it's common sense. So I'm vehemently conservative and I'm vehemently liberal, depending on the issue.
I like that perspective a lot. Has your party affiliation ever changed, though, over the years? Has there ever been a moment in time where you thought you fell in line more with the Republicans and the Democrats, or have you always been in line with the Democratic Party?
Pretty much in line with the Democratic Party. There are some issues that Republicans have which are common sense. You don't spend money that you don't have. So there are a few times when I can kind of get along.
Okay. I did some research, and it shows that most Mexican Americans fall in line with the Democratic Party. Do you believe that this is true, or do you think there's a greater divide between Mexican Americans who vote Democratic or who fall in line with the Republican Party?
Oh, I absolutely think that the majority of Mexican Americans, Tejanos, fall in line with the Democratic Party. Now, it's interesting to hear the pitch by the Republicans about, oh, Hispanics, Mexican Americans, Latinos, they're more in line with us on family values and so forth and so on. Give me a break. It's common sense. Everybody should have family values.
I agree. What, I guess, accomplishments then have the Democratic Party promoted for Mexican Americans over the years?
Well, I think going back to desegregation, it was the Democratic Party going toward those issues that cover everyone, not just Mexican Americans. Education, college tuition assistance, bilingual education, appointments of women and minorities to certain boards and commissions in the state, and supporting those from the city to the county to the state. Not enough, but heck, the last governor we had was people like Ann Richards or Mark White. The appointments made now by the Republicans and the Republican governors have been, maybe they have a Spanish surname, but they're there in name only, if you get my drift.
I do. Is there a political party that you feel like has hindered your community over the years? Or have there been certain occasions that...
I think I think parties, to some extent, both, because in the early days, the let's say in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and even to the 60s, sometime, it was getting better, there were some Democrats who were a hindrance. And they, of course, became Republicans later. So then it was, of course, the Republicans who have hindered.
In what ways? Maybe just give a quick example of one instance that they've hindered Mexican Americans.
Their votes against bilingual education. The funding of public schools, especially in the rural areas. The powerful lobbies that have been there on big money efforts, and the legislative process.
Okay. How does changing demographics change the political landscape for a community?
Well, you can have all the changing demographics in the world. You can have the biggest population, but if they don't vote, ni pa qué. And I have gotten gray hair for 50 years trying to get that done. We've made some progress, but I'm conservative in this way. Government should help the people when it is needed. But by golly, it begins with that family, la familia. It begins with that mom and that dad. If that dad, for example, is not present, it's going to hurt the family and hurt us as Tejanos and hurt us as Americans. So the responsibility begins there. Oh, I could go on, but
do you think though, you mentioned an interesting point about the aspect of people not voting. Do you think if Mexican Americans in particular would, vote more, or the younger generations would take a step and do that, do you think it would help the advancement of political empowerment? Or
this state would change immensely, and I think that some of the right wing is a little afraid of that. The right wing Anglo, shall I say, is a little afraid of that, thinking that if the Hispanics, Tejanos, get the majority and get all the power, they're going to treat us badly. No. They're not going to do the same darn silly, bigoted things that were cast upon us in the past. We want to be true Americans, that's all.
Okay. Next, we're going to move into an aspect of coalition building for Mexican Americans. Let's just start with what issues led to coalition building back when you were, working for maybe the Urban League and the Peace Corps. Let's just start from there and maybe build our way up.
It's all about coalition building. It's common sense. You communicate, you see what is in common and what is not, and work on those issues where there are commonalities and agreements. Politically, in business, or otherwise. The way we were elected in the first place was that we needed a coalition of labor, AFL-CIO, of liberals, of African Americans, Mexican Americans, environmentalists, and that coalition is what makes us progress. It certainly is not happening in Washington right now, but it should.
Could you describe the people of the coalitions, or maybe go back? Maybe if they come from, do they come from different economic backgrounds? Do they come from different races? That sort of thing.
Yeah, to bring it down to here locally in Austin, like I said, we put these coalitions together. Labor, AFL-CIO, have always been for the working man and woman, and they have commonalities with African Americans, with Mexican Americans. We have the environmentalist. If you think of anybody who has some common sense, we want to leave this earth the same, or close to the same way that God gave it to us in the first place. Youth, students, we put that together because so often the youth and the students are left out of the picture. You're too young to know anything. So in talking about coalitions, I was asked by the City Council to sit on the Charter Review Committee, and as chairman of that, we pushed through having districts for the City of Austin, and so the students were very much involved in that. Well, everybody agreed to it, pretty much. The Republicans, Democrats, neighborhood associations, environmentalists, minorities, NAACP, LULAC, etc. So that's what coalition does. It builds and builds for the better of the community.
Okay. Are there any external constraints sometime that hinder coalition building?
Well, yeah, there are intentional spins put out there by the people that don't want coalitions to be built. And it's usually put out there by extreme right folks.
Okay. How does the differences in class for Mexican Americans, I guess, do they help or hurt advocating for political empowerment and political rights?
Well, if you're talking about class as an economic class, you have a large percentage of Mexican Americans in low income. A good number in the last 20 years or so, 30 years, in middle class, and very few in the high economic range. I think that I would concentrate vote-wise on the low income and the middle class. Not leave the high income out totally, but you're going to find a good number of those individuals having become Republican, or in some cases forgetting where they come from and not considering themselves as Hispanic or Tejanos.
Okay. Next, we're just going to finish up with a couple closing thoughts and questions that I have. This one I thought was interesting just because you bring in a lot of different races can represent. I mean, you represent people. You try not to particularly advocate for a particular race, but can someone of a different race represent Mexican Americans?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That individual has to know the community. I cite you my good friend Elliot from El Paso,
Mm-hmm.
Shapley, knows the community, is totally bilingual, and has a good heart and is a good fighter. And that can be done, regardless of color, men or women. Matter of fact, I think we ought to have a woman governor in Texas this coming year.
Do you think it's going to happen?
It's going to be really hard, but I think it can be done. And I think women should lead the charge, and I'm going to follow them.
I like that. Just another question. What are your perception of other minorities? Let's say African Americans. What obstacles do they face? Are they similar to the obstacles that Mexican Americans have overcome or still need to overcome, or are they different?
I think they're very similar. I think that Mexican Americans have gone through many of the very same things that African Americans have in this country. You can go back all the way back in history on how the Texas Rangers were just lynching people here in Texas, and our segregated schools. I went there. And I think we still have much to do. And so I think there are natural coalitions that occur like that. But many similarities.
Okay. How do you feel about being a role model since you've been in a position of power for 21 years and beyond that? People respect you and honor you. So how do you feel about being that person?
Well, I don't know if I'm a role model, but I hope that somebody can learn a few things from me. We must realize that no man or woman walks on water. Everybody makes mistakes, so there's no perfection. I just try to show direction to especially kids, young people.
Okay. And then let me backtrack for 1 second. I apologize. How have things changed after the Voting Rights Act in terms of Mexican American rights or rights for any minority that experienced?
We have made some great gains. We have gotten certain people elected. But at this point in time, we're standing still or going backwards, not of our own volition, but the people who are opposed to us, the fringe groups on the right, the Tea Parties. the people who are still bigoted and racist. They're out there. And it's like Jefferson said, that is to say that the price of liberty is eternal vigilance.
Okay, and then lastly, what do you want people to remember you for?
A person who tried and got a few things accomplished, and who tried to teach from experience.
Okay.
I'd like to be remembered as Emma's husband.
That's very nice. Now, is there anything else I might have missed today that you would like to bring in as we're closing up this interview?
Oh, there's so many things to talk about. Maybe we can have a second session sometime.
But no other final thoughts for today?
Let's try to reach the American dream together.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Gonzalo. I really appreciate you taking the time. Okay, just describe for me how this lawsuit, the lawsuit in Bastrop, affected your education. I guess let's start with, what would have happened if the lawsuit was never passed?
God only knows, but I can only tell you that I probably would not have gone further than 2 or 3 grades in school, and like most other Hispanics, gone out as a teenager to work and help the family, be it picking cotton or driving a truck or what have you. I would like to think that I would be on my own, reading all kind of books and becoming a learned leader, but the odds would be against us in that kind of a situation, and that's why I think that we ought to honor that civil rights lawyer Gustavo Garcia from San Antonio, and several other people who helped him, including Bob Eckhart, who later became a congressman, and whose daughter is today running for county judge in Travis County, Sarah Eckhart. I don't know. I think that those individuals, those leaders, didn't realize the full impact of their work, because it affected millions of children.
How, I guess, describe a typical school day for you before the lawsuit was passed. What were the differences between when it was still segregated?
Well, fortunately, I only experienced 1 year of segregation. But all I can remember is a couple of things. One, the teacher would give us a sheet of paper, blank sheet of paper, and a crayon. Knock yourself out. That was it. The other thing I remember is that, well, 2 other things. One, somebody stole a cousin of mine's lunch. We had a little brown bag, and the teacher sat us all out in front of the back of the school on the ground, and she would look at all of us and see who would crack about who'd stolen the lunch, and nobody cracked. So we walked back into the classroom, and she has a ruler, and you'd put out your hand and she'd whack every one of us when we went in there. The other thing I remember is after a rainy day, being out on the swings, and I was 6 years old, and there was water under the swing, and I just splashed in there, and the older girls came to dry me off in front of the stove that was over there. Pretty good memories.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Describe the 2 filibusters that you were involved in when you were serving in office.
Well, first of all, filibusters are not all they're cracked up to be. It's rough. You got to stand there. You can't lean on your desk. You can't sit. You can't eat. Of course, you can't go to the bathroom. And then you have to talk continuously and stay on the subject. And after about 10 hours of that, you start getting a little tired and woozy. The filibuster in Texas, anyway, is used as part of the process in the rules. On you want to get something accomplished, you put pressure on the rest of the Senate. For example, when the airport was being closed, the old Miller Airport was being closed, there was a vote by the citizens of Austin to move it to Bergstrom, where it is now. Some of the senators wanted to leave it there so that they could come into downtown real quick. And I said, no, my constituents have voted to move it. And if that's what you're going to do, we're going to filibuster. So they backed off and they had the airport moved over there. In the filibusters that I actually did, it had to do with protection of the Barton Springs and the Edwards Aquifer. Legislation was pending that would harm the environment, and especially Barton Springs and the Edwards Aquifer. So in one case for 18 hours I filibustered. In another case for 21 hours I filibustered and killed a few of their bills and made them realize that we must protect the environment.
How did it feel when you received a standing ovation for filibustering for that long of a period of time? Were you relieved?
Standing ovation, I'm telling you, after 21 hours of standing and talking, you don't remember much else. You just want to hit the sack and sleep for 10 or 20 hours. Well, 10 or 12. But I'm glad somebody appreciated it because it's hard. It's really hard. And I know that in telling Wendy Davis about filibustering, I said, Wendy, you can do it, but it'll be kind of tough after about 10 hours.
Was that one of the hardest things you ever did as well in office?
Nah.
Okay. Just curious.
I was in good shape. I don't know if I could do 21 hours now, but it was worth it.
Okay. And then just describe for me very lastly the quorum in Albuquerque.
Oh, there were some issues that were going to be taken up.
Wait. Go ahead and start. I don't know what that sound is.
I'm not sure.
That's
Sorry?
Is that your phone?
Yeah. that was
Okay.
my phone.
Okay.
Let's just start that from the top.
Turn the sound down.
Bring it over and I'll turn it off.
What was at stake for the 2 filibusters?
Filibusters was protection of the Edwards Aquifer and the Barton Springs swimming area.
What would have happened if the filibuster wouldn't have gone through? What would have been the result of that?
Well, there was legislation pending for building over the Edwards Aquifer and pollution eventually of the water and messing up Barton Springs and all the swimming beauty we have out there.
Okay, and now describe the quorum that took place in Albuquerque.
There was an effort being made which would have hurt Democrats and the people of Texas in our estimation. Redistricting. And the only avenue we had left to fight against it was to break the quorum. And so 11 of us took off to Albuquerque, New Mexico to take a stand over there. And we spent 6 weeks there. One of the senators broke, and that broke our quorum. One of the senators from Houston, and we had to come back because we needed that 11th person. So it was the Albuquerque 11 minus 1.
What year was that?
Oh, I don't remember, 2003 perhaps.
Okay. So you, just to get this right, to make sure I'm understanding it correctly, so you went to Albuquerque, and then because the one person from Houston had to leave, you were not able to finish your...
We got beat. For example, you have in Travis County 5 congressmen. They just tore the hell out of Travis County, which I think is unfair, and we got to keep fighting.
Okay. Thank you again.